Let's talk about digital strategy alignment. And when I say that, I really mean matching your organization's capabilities to your digital goals. My name is John Edmiston. I'm a partner here at Triumph Tech, and I also serve at Spark Development Network as the Rock RMS product owner. Digital strategies are so important to churches right now. They always have been for the last few years, but coronavirus has really heightened the need and the speed at which we've needed to bring these digital strategies to bear. And they're not going anywhere. We know we still need these, even if life gets back to normal or when life gets back to normal. We still need to keep these digital strategies to extend the capabilities of the church beyond the weekends and to reach people on a daily basis. And when we reach people on a daily basis, we need to create basically the concept of a digital auditorium. Physical auditoriums, of course, are still going to have their place. They're super important, but we need to create the concept of a digital auditorium. And I think this is a good word picture to use because we know what it takes to build an auditorium, right? We know the technology, we know the budgets, we know what needs to go into that. We need to consider that same scale when we start talking about digital strategies. Now, it hasn't always been the case that the complexity and the budgets were needed to do some of the things that we've done in the past, but we're going to a new level, and not by a little bit, but by a lot. We can't spend the same amount of money on budgets for this and have the same capabilities and have a successful digital strategy in these very technical times when everybody's expectations of what a digital strategy should be are so high, and the amazing things that we can do now with the digital strategy. Now, when we think about that, we really have to be thinking about two things. Oftentimes we get the first one correct, which is content. Content is king, it used to be the saying, and it's still very, very important. That's the thing we think about the most, and I think it's actually the easiest thing to think about with a digital strategy is the content. But for churches, it's especially important that we have connection too. So our digital strategy needs to consider both content and connection. Now, when it comes to connection, it's a bit harder, right? Because we have not yet invented the ideas and the models for what that looks like. If we look at technology, especially around things like smartphones, we take a lot for granted nowadays. When the first smartphones came out, especially the first advanced ones like the iPhone, it really broke new ground and created new models of mental models for how we use and interact with technology that we take for granted today. Even like the layout of how you interact with applications and how you launch applications. Again, today that seems very basic, but when the first iPhone came out, it was actually very advanced. And then we saw smartphones that came after that taking on a lot of those same design patterns. And today we think, well, of course. Consider something like how you copy and paste on a smartphone. You know, the first iPhone, for example, didn't even have that capability. In fact, there was resistance even to add that as a feature because it just seemed A, too hard, and B, not needed. Well, now we know we absolutely have to have it, and we know exactly the pattern, and it seems very simple to us. But those things weren't simple to invent. And it's going to be the same thing with digital strategies for churches. A lot of the things that we're going to invent together over the next couple years are going to seem like, well, of course, that's the way you should have done it. But we shouldn't dismiss how hard it is to actually invent those things. Now, this isn't the primary topic of today's video. We'll have more videos and more concepts on this. But today we want to talk about making sure that we think about the maturity levels for a digital strategy. And I want to propose that there's 3 different maturity levels. And I'm going to use the example of a specific toy. So our toy is Legos. And so there's different levels of Legos. Now, I think this analogy is strong, but there's one thing I don't like about the analogy, and that is this first level, the simple level, which is Duplo. Simply because Duplo to us has the connotation of being just for little kids. And this, I don't want to detract from the importance of this first maturity level. If you're in a smaller organization or maybe a larger organization with a lower budget, a Duplo strategy might be right up your alley. And that does not mean that you can't do amazing things, and it doesn't mean that you can't have an amazing impact on people. Okay, what it does mean though is you need to keep it simple. And simple can still be very effective and very strategic. In fact, just to kind of throw it in here, I mean, here's a very interesting design and invention that probably goes beyond what you think you could do with Duplo. But you can do some amazing things with this strategy. And you want to, if this is the capability level that you're at, you want to stick with this. The next level up, of course, is just regular Legos. And you can do amazing things with regular Legos, but they're a little bit harder to use. And that's why you don't give regular Lego sets to very, very young kids. Not only is it a choking hazard, but they're not going to be successful with it. And they're not going to build things that are amazing and that are strong and structurally sound. You wait until later in life to give them that. And then the third level is the technique set. And these, of course, are very complex. They're very amazing if you do it right. If you don't do it right, they're actually like terrible, right? Better to stick with the maturity level that you're at. If you don't give these sets specifically to young kids either. Why? Because they're not going to have fun with it. They're not going to be successful. And actually, they might be a little dangerous. But when done right, they're structurally sound. They do amazing things, but they are difficult. The instruction manuals for these are quite large. And if someone doesn't have the mindset for it, they're not even going to have fun with it. And they're not going to be successful. So you don't buy this for a present for kids who don't have that skill set or mindset. And it's the same thing with the organizations. You don't want to overextend your capabilities because you're not going to be successful. If you stay within your capabilities, you can have amazing success and have a huge impact on your audience. So these are the three levels of capability that I want to talk about. And we're going to dig a little bit deeper in how you might self-assess yourself to see which one you're at. Before we get to that, though, I do want to talk about the amazing characteristics of technology. Because as technology goes on, two things happen. Things get easier and things get cheaper. So over time, what's going to happen is another level of technology will come in and it's going to push everybody down one. Now that means that things get cheaper. So maybe you couldn't afford something more sophisticated. Well, it's only going to get cheaper in technology and it's only going to get easier. So what's going to happen is like things like the instructions will get easier. The kits will be easier to assemble, but you'll still have the same power. And of course, they get cheaper. So don't be frustrated if maybe today you can't do that one thing that you want to do. Don't worry, tomorrow or the next year, you probably will be able to do that and it'll be simpler. I know from a rock perspective, this is something that we look at all the time. We're constantly trying to make the product easier, constantly trying to add more content to instruct people on how to do it right. So it's the same within rock as it is with most technologies. Okay, so let's look at how we can self-assess ourselves into these three different levels. And I want to talk about 5 attributes that you want to measure your organization on to see where you land. And the first one, of course, is skill set. So what's your technical skill set? What are you capable of actually doing? If we think about the Lego set, do you have the skill set needed to do a technique set? Or maybe you're down at the Lego level. Or again, maybe it's Duplo. You want to keep within your skill set. And that's very important. And I think we kind of get this pretty naturally of why that's important. One that we don't necessarily get as easily is the engineering mindset. So it could be that you have a lot of skills. You know what to do, but if you don't have the right mindset to do it right, you can still have major failure points. And I think the best analogy or word picture for this is the engineer at Jurassic Park. In the first movie, if you remember back, he was a brilliant person. He seemed to have like an incredible genius mind that could design this park with, great security systems. But if you remember back to his desk, it was a complete mess. And he was very sloppy with his work. And in the end, it was that sloppiness that actually kind of is what freed all the dinosaurs and made the whole problem, that and some, greed. But it was that mindset that was his failure point in that. And it's the same is true in technology space. In my career, I've known a lot of brilliant, gifted technologists, but they didn't have the right mindset. They didn't build things that lasted, that were reliable and constructed correctly. And in the reverse is also true. I've known some people who had a great mindset and their skill set actually wasn't quite as good as the other people, but they were actually more successful because they were consistent. I just heard a quote the other day that if you can be 10 times more consistent than average, then your worth to your employer or to those that you're working with is 100x. So consistency is very, very key in our world and nowhere more so than in technology. Then the third one after skill set mindset is resources. And this really comes down to, well, how many people do you have? If you have a brilliant person with skill set and they have great mindset, but you have a super large project and a super large organization, you still may not be able to do that technique-sized project simply because you just don't have enough resources. So resources is the quantity of people that you have to bring to this. And the next one is a very complex one, and that's leadership. Where is the leadership of your church around digital strategy? If they don't know where they're going, if they don't have the right goals, then it's going to be very, very hard to pull this off. You might have the right people, the right mindset, and the right skills, but if the leadership is not there to support those people from a leadership perspective, but also from a goals and strategy perspective, you're still probably not going to want to do that techniques project. You might have the technical ability, but you don't have the leadership capability to do that. So this one is very, very, very important. And the final one is budget. Now you might think, well, resources and budget are kind of the same thing, but it's really not, especially in the technology space. You might have the budget for the people, but you don't have the people, and you can't get the people because it's very, very hard to find the right technologists. I mean, we can speak from experience. Sometimes we've had the budget to hire, but it's taken well over a year to even find the person. In fact, we have positions that we've been trying to hire for well over a year and still don't have anybody. So you might have the money, but you don't have the resources. And that's going to be a challenge. And that's why it's important that it has its own attribute in our matrix. Okay, so we're going to take these 5 attributes, and the next thing we need to do is we need to kind of measure ourselves with that. So here's a sample organization that perhaps we've kind of done some measuring on. And so we said, well, they've got some decent skill sets, but their mindset's not so great. So, they might build things, but they didn't really put the time into planning for that. And maybe they didn't, kind of rushed it and just kind of threw code against the wall or configuration against the wall and hope it's going to stick. That's not great. But they do have a good number of resources, but their leadership doesn't quite have the goals and strategy in place, and maybe they don't know how to support a technical team in that. They have unrealistic expectations, or I've seen in some cases leadership force technologists to do things the wrong way because they didn't understand and they thought maybe they did, and that's not very helpful. But they have good budget, so every organization is not going to fall down one column. Life is never that simple. And so in this case, what I would recommend is, you need to start with something probably in the high Duplo area, but whatever you're doing, please don't try to tackle a technique level digital strategy. You're not going to be successful in that. And they might think, well, that's where I want to be because that's the kind of impact I want to have. And I'm going to tell them, you're not going to make any impact over there. You're going to have zero impact. And in fact, it might even be embarrassing. If you did a high level Duplo technical strategy, you're going to have a very successful impact on the people around you. So by getting into the right column, you're going to have more success. Now, a different organization might have, a totally different matrix. Now, if you notice, the skill set didn't really go up that much, but boy, the mindset did. It's like a totally different type of person or people over in this organization. And so they're going to be much more able to do advanced things. Also notice that resources didn't shift that much either. So what shifted? Mindset, leadership, and budget a little bit. So this organization, even though not everything shifted, might be just ready for a technique level project. They have some things maybe to be concerned about, like you might think, well, resources are a little low, so it might take a little bit longer. But hey, we have the mindset, skill set. We might need to kind of build into that. We might want to make sure that they get a little extra training, or maybe partner up with some people who can coach them on that. But what I typically find that I would rather have really good mindset and a little bit less skill set than the other way around. And definitely, if you have super high skill set and super low mindset, that's a disaster. So mindset, in my opinion, is a little bit more important than skill set. And then a third organization, again, a lot of that falls back down in terms of skill set and mindset, but leadership is still very, very strong. Now, this is a dangerous situation here. I want to point out is that leadership is all ready for this. They have the capability in terms of having a goal and strategy, but they don't have the technology team to back it up. And so what will happen here a lot of times is the leadership will just go ahead with that technique because, darn it, they know what they're doing. But if you don't have the technologists to back it up, it's still going to be a very big disaster. And the leadership is going to be very, very frustrated because they're not going to understand why this can't get done. Technology is not easy. You have to have a symbiotic relationship between the leadership and the technologist to have success. You can't have one or the other without the other. Now, this situation could be resolved by bringing in an external resource. So a partner or an agency to help with that. And that can be a very successful thing. And we're going to talk a little bit about that here in a bit. So that might be a way to augment that. But you still need to be very careful. I've seen many organizations with really strong leadership jump into a very complex digital strategy and fall flat because they didn't have the right people to bring it through. So let's talk a little bit about how we measure these things. I want to start with resources. That's a pretty easy one to measure. You can kind of compare and contrast your digital strategy and the size of your organization with others who are successful, and you can kind of compare the resources. I do think that you have to be careful when you compare. There's going to be some organizations that you're going to look at and they're going to be like, well, they have like a lot of people. Like, of course, we need more people. But you don't know what their maturity model is. Like sometimes we would take a very high functioning organization that's doing a technique level thing and say, well, we need that many people too. Well, you don't know all the work that organization has to do and support. I've actually seen some of the largest churches with the most sophisticated maturity model. But if you look at the amount of work per person that they have, it's much higher than a smaller organization. And that smaller organization might have some desire to have that many people or to feel slightly jealous that the other church has that many people, but they don't realize how hard those people are working over there. And if you look at amount of like effort needed to the amount of work needed, they have a higher one than even the smaller church has today. So be careful on how you judge, okay? The grass is always greener on the other side, and we have to have empathy because what looks like it's easy from the outside is usually very, very, very difficult on the inside. And we work with a lot of those organizations, and we know the amount of stress and effort that's being applied in there, and it's actually quite amazing. Okay, so resources, probably easy to quantitatively like say, okay, well we know we can judge that. Budget, that's another one that's pretty easy to just talk with people and get a level set on that. I think a difficult one can be leadership. That's kind of a political one, and I think that's one that is often we have to check ourselves on that. Like maybe we're not in leadership, and we might say, well, we don't have the leadership backing to do this. When actually you might actually do. Maybe you're just not seeing it, or you're not in some of those meetings. And so we might, if we're not careful, we might undervalue where our leadership is. Or if we're a leader, we might think we're further along than we are. And so if you're the leader, what I'd want to say is talk with other leaders who are further ahead than you and make sure that you ask them to help assess your capability for this, and then be humble enough to listen to that. If you're not in leadership, I would say just be a little bit careful if you say that, well, we don't have the leadership, they're not giving us the strategy and the goals for this. That might be being done behind closed doors that you don't know. And what might look like no movement might be something else. So just be careful on this one. If you're a leader, you're probably going to overrate yourself. And if you're not a leader, you're probably going to underrate your leadership is kind of what I've seen. So be careful on that one. Now, the two at the top, I think, are the most important and the hardest. And I would say the top two, skill set and mindset, you cannot rate your own skill set and mindset because it comes down to the simple fact you don't know what you don't know. And if I look through my career, I know that's true. I'm always looking back at myself 6 months, 12 months behind, thinking, I had no clue what I was doing. And not no clue, but not nearly as much as I thought. And now that I'm 6 months, 12 months out, I'm like, oh man, I know so much more. And because I've done that enough times, I know right now not to think too much of myself because I'm going to keep learning. I'm going to keep growing, and I'm going to keep finding out more that I don't know. I think with experience, you start to get an idea of how much you don't know. But when you're newer to technology, man, I can literally think back to moments in my early career where I had such a huge head. Luckily, it never really left my head. But I had a huge head and thinking I knew way more than I did. And like what I like to say is, in technology, you must be humble, otherwise you will be humbled. And I think that's exactly what we hear in the Bible too. So I'm saying you can't self-assess yourself. So what do? Again, you have to reach out to others who are further along than you, and you need to have significant talks with them and ask them to help you self-assess. And again, this is a humble thing. You have to, you have to like listen to that, and you can't let your feelings get hurt. They're giving you a gift. You need to ask for that gift. You need to spend significant time. This is not like a one meeting for 1 hour conversation. This is probably 4 meetings, maybe even some of them reaching, 2 hours, where they're asking you questions, where they're kind of, it might almost feel like a job interview, but you're gonna ask them, hey, can you just be real with me? Rate me on these skill set and my mindset, and help me, because I don't want to leave my capabilities, because I know I can't be successful for my organization if I leave this capability area. And it also helps you put a growth plan in place. Hopefully they're going to identify some things that you need to look at. And that's no better gift than you can get than someone who's further ahead of you telling you the areas that you need to grow in. That is like a treasure. So again, look at this chart, assess your organization, reach out, try to get people to help you on a skill set, mindset. And then I think your leadership needs to do that on their own with other leaders who are ahead of them. Don't do it for them. Let them, encourage them, maybe even make those contacts for them. Our rock community is an amazing community that you can reach out and find out, and connect your leaders with other leaders. Just because they're not in the community doesn't mean anything. You can help build those bridges. And I think in most cases, they're going to love you for that. Okay. So what do you do though? And maybe even in this case, when the leadership is there, the budget's there, but you don't quite have the right resources. Well, one thing is you're not trapped. You can go out and get help. And at the Rock website, we have a partners page that you can go out to, and you can look for help for people to kind of take you down or let you level up. I would say that it's probably only realistic to think that they're only going to level up one level of maturity. If they level up you 2, they can probably do that, but then you're not going to be ready to support that. You can probably support a one level up jump, but you can't do 2. And a part of that engagement might be some training or some documentation or some coaching on how to maintain that. So the natural question you might have is, okay, well, this is great, but how do I make sure that these organizations can do that? And that's great, because just as your organization has a maturity level, so do these organizations. And so you might find maybe there's an organization, I'm going to make a fictitious one, ABC Tech. Maybe they specialize in the Duplo maturity level. And again, that's not bad. I hate that analogy from that one point that the Duplo seems like, like kids play, and it's not. That's an effective strategy. And if they can effectively help people get that implemented, that is going to create a vast amount of success for organizations. What's only going to be a problem is when they try to step across a line that they're not capable of. Now, again, how do I figure out which one of these and what's their maturity level? Well, I would say there's two good ways of doing that. The first way is talk to references. Now, when you do that, you want to make sure you ask for references that are in the capability level that you're trying to get to. So if you're going to have a techniques level project, make sure the references you're being handled, they weren't like Duplo level projects, because that's not going to be helpful. And then when you get those references, talk through what are the strengths. And as you talk with them, you might say, hey, I'm really trying to make a very complex digital strategy here. Tell me about yours. And then let you compare and contrast to see if they are in the same maturity level, the projects, and then if the organizations, how well they fared. So be very diligent on your referrals, grade the projects that they worked on in terms of how complex they were, and then ask clarifying questions on how the partner implemented that. Now, I said there's two. The second way I would say is look for partners who are putting out content in this area. If you have an engineering mindset and if you have these skill sets and you have this knowledge and you're getting this experience by working with others in the space, you should be sharing it. Like, that's a natural tendency with people who have this knowledge, especially in the rock community, because the rock community is a special place. It's a place where you give and you don't take. And so there should be content all over their website. There should be content in other rock mediums, on the community sites, on their social media. They should be sharing this content, because if you have it, there should be this strong urge to want to show everybody and tell everybody about it to help bring people up another level. I know at Triumph, our goal, whether you're work with us or not, is we want to level up everybody. We want to take everybody up one level. And when we learn new things, we want to share them, not only with our internal staff, but we want to share them with everybody that, who can benefit from it. And that's why we've invested so much time and effort into videos like this and in our website. So again, look and judge partners a little bit about what they're sharing out into the community. And again, it's a natural extension. When you have the knowledge, you want to share the knowledge. So in summary, it's important to realize that there's different levels of complexity in your digital strategy, different maturity levels, and that you need to be able to self-assess yourself. And you don't want to adopt a strategy that you don't have the capabilities to do right. And in doing that, there's 5 ways that we've identified that you want to measure yourself on: skill set, mindset, resources, leadership, and budget. And we talked about how some of these, like resources and budget, you can probably self-assess fairly easily. Others, like leadership, you're going to have your leadership connect with other leaders further ahead in digital strategy to get a solid assessment. Also, if you're not a leader, please don't try to self-assess too strongly, because you may not have all the access to the information that would paint a good picture. And just know that there's a natural tendency that you might be a little bit more critical of leadership. Again, in my experience, I've seen that quite often. And when it comes to skill set and mindset, engineering mindset, you really need to ask someone else to help you who's further along, whether that be someone at another church or perhaps even a friend who in the corporate space who is further along. So hopefully this has been helpful. I would definitely sit down and think about this, maybe bring this to your wider team and to your leadership and talk through it. Because if you don't have a congruency between where you want to go and what your capabilities are, you won't make it to your destination. And the only thing that will happen is you'll waste valuable time and valuable money, and you'll increase your frustration level. So staying in your capability maturity level is going to be critical. And if you need to step over, then you definitely want to reach out and get help before you do that. If there's any way we can help with that, just reach out and let us know. We'd love to be able to help. And I hope this has been helpful.